Let's talk further about South Africa's unemployment data, or the latest as released by Stats South Africa. We're joined tonight by Youth Capital Network Mobiliser, Lethiwe Sinodumo. Lethiwe, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for being with us on News at Prime. So, a marginal improvement in the level of joblessness in this country, but when it comes to the youth, we're still very much in crisis, aren't we?
Absolutely. We find ourselves in a situation where 9.1 million South Africans are not in employment, education, or training. Basically, they are locked out of opportunities.
If close to 10 million young people are not working, they're not going through an educational program of some sort, it has a present chilling effect, but also raises a more longer-term concern, does it not, about their future and the future of the country?
Absolutely. As we know from research that the longer an individual is unemployed, the less likely they are able to find employment. And so if we find ourselves with young people that are not in employment, they're not in education, in other words, they're not even acquiring the skills, they're not able to acquire the skills needed in the market, we'll find ourselves just in a deeper crisis of people being chronically unemployed.
I'm curious to get your reading of the unemployment data presented today and Stats SA's census, which show that the population is growing. South Africa is increasingly made up of young people, but they are also, as we're hearing, struggling to find work. So what picture does it paint when you read the two reports together?
It basically reads a picture of South Africa that will not have individuals that can contribute to the country's economy. As we've seen as Youth Capital, we know that many young people find themselves unemployed because our economy is not growing to the level that it needs to grow, to the extent that it needs to grow. And so if we find ourselves with young people who could potentially contribute to the country's economic growth, unable to do so, then we really are, as a country, metaphorically speaking, shooting ourselves in the foot. We're not giving ourselves a good chance in terms of realizing our potential as a country. But having said that, there are steps that can be taken to ensure that young people and the future of the country is well positioned to succeed.
And Lethiwe, why do you think it is that despite years of talking about bringing down the rate of joblessness in this country, especially among young people, we're still seeing a worrying trend, or at least not an overhaul that would significantly address the problem?
So as Youth Capital, what we've learned is that the issue with unemployment is not a linear issue, right? It is not simply a matter of creating jobs for young people. That is part of the equation in terms of solving the problem. But on the other side of the equation, it's also a matter of removing many roadblocks that young people face on their journey to entering the labor market. We know that young people face many challenges while they are still learning. So there are what we call roadblocks, during their phase of learning, and then also roadblocks as they transition in the labor market. For example, the high cost of looking for work. So if we don't take into consideration those roadblocks, if we don't remove those barriers to entry for young people, then even though we may create many jobs, young people will not be able to be absorbed into the economy because they will be confronted by the many roadblocks.
Whose job is it to remove the roadblocks? Because the other recurring conversation when it comes to South Africa's unemployment crisis is around whether government should be the one talking about the creation of work, or simply focusing on the creation of an environment that enables such growth.
So, in our action plan, which highlights, and your viewers can find our action plan on our website, youthcapital.co.za, it does not only point out, what are the roadblocks, but what steps need to be taken and who therefore can take the steps to remove the roadblocks. We're talking about civil society organizations that support young people, for example, to stay in school and get the qualification they need in order to enter the labor market. We're talking about the role of employers to recognize the fact that young people spend money to look for work, and therefore, challenging employers to change their hiring practices, not, for example, require young people to print CVs and submit hard copies of their CVs, but rather, apply online. And certain steps have been taken in light of that. We have now the sayouth.mobi that allows young people to look for opportunities to have a digital CV instead of printing a CV. So you have civil society organizations, you have employers playing a part. But as you've pointedly pointed out, government also has a role to play, not only in terms of creating a conducive environment for jobs to be created, but also in relation to the public employment programs that the government designs to respond to the youth unemployment crisis. We saw with the presidential employment stimulus that led to one of the initiatives being the Basic Education Employment Initiative, that young people can be a part of a public employment program and acquire the necessary skills to find further employment, but also earn an income that they very much need, considering the households they come from. So in other words, in conclusion, it takes different parties. It's not just about government. It's about civil society. It is about employers. It's a collaborative effort that is needed to solve the issue of youth unemployment.
Let me get your thoughts on something that was said by a representative from the Free Market Foundation. We actually played part of that interview before we came to you, and they say this: they think the best way to create jobs is to eliminate barriers to employment, possible costs that employers suffer before they employ people. Would that help?
Absolutely, that's definitely part of it. And we know, from our engagement with employers, we actually had a focus group discussion in 2021 where we spoke to employers who said they are keen to work with institutions of learning and help institutions of learning better prepare young people to enter the labor market. And so it is definitely the case where employers are saying, we want to employ, support us to ensure that we can employ by preparing young people. So there's work to be done by tertiary institutions in better preparing young people to enter the labor market. But I know as well that there are organizations that run work readiness programs, and those programs definitely play a part in preparing young people to enter the labor market.
Lethiwe Sinodumo, good to speak to you. She's with Youth Capital Network Mobiliser at the organization.